I'm Amber Birch, and I'm the Education Coordinator. I'd like to welcome you to Kickapoo Valley Reserve. Before we jump in, we'd like to first remember the land acknowledgement statement. You can follow along up on the screen or board if you would like. The Kickapoo Reserve Management Board acknowledges that the state and federal lands that comprise the reserve fall within the ancestral homelands of the First Nations people, including the Ho-Chunk Nation. We recognize the sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk and other First Nations and will work towards a shared future by continuing to create collaborative opportunities to protect and preserve these lands. One of the best ways we recognize that we can protect and preserve these lands is through education. So thank you for coming and helping us to reach these goals. Our Driftless Dialogue lecture tonight is Native Plants and Trees for the Birds and the Bees, supporting pollinators through landscaping with our native woody plants. The Driftless Dialogue lecture series is supported by Friends of Kickapoo Valley Reserve, Badger Talks, and the Ralph E. Nuzum Reforestation Fund. Speaking for us tonight is David Garrison Stevens. David is the curator of the Living Collection of Woody Plants at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Arboretum. His work background includes tree breeding and selection, greenhouse facility management, public garden supervision, and commercial vegetable production. He has a bachelor's degree in horticulture from Virginia Tech and a master's degree in horticulture from the UW-Madison. When not at the Arboretum, he manages his family's 130-acre certified organic farm by Baraboo. Welcome, David.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for coming out on this kind of dreary day, but we certainly needed the rain here. So we'll just launch into it. But with such an intimate group, please, if you have questions as they come up, feel free to ask. So what I want to start with, and oftentimes we don't think of this in our backyard, front yard, or whatnot, is that what we're trying to do to support both birds and pollinators is to mimic nature. And to do that, we want to have different levels. So we'd have a top canopy, mid-story, understory, and ground cover. Sometimes we focus, because of our height, if for nothing else, on that understory. And that's where we're often putting flowers, shrubs, etc. But by choosing a variety of trees and shrubs of this varying height, we can try to mimic the natural forest structure, and that's what they're going to be drawn to. And this is what it can look like in your yard. So we do certainly want to have a variety of both flowers and fruit, if possible, throughout the year. Flowers not going to be possible, certainly in Wisconsin in the middle of winter. Another talk I give, though, there are a few things we can actually have flower in the winter here too. But flowers, a variety of species with varying bloom times, not just things in the early spring. And I like to talk about lawns. Lawns, I think most of us have them, and for good reason, whether that be fire is why people started to mow around, or rodents coming into your house. But lawns do not need to be monocultures, and that's where we get in trouble. People get fixated on just grasses, of course non-native grasses, cool season grasses. So have any of you ever thought of your lawn as its own ecosystem? And yeah, well, some of you have, but a lot of people do not. So it used to be very common when you'd go to buy lawn seed or grass seed, you would have things like clover and other things in there. And for some reason, we've really gotten away from that. No-mow May sounds great, but if you don't have these species present, flowering species, they're not going to come in just during 1 month by not mowing. So for us at the Arboretum, for me at home, violets, right, our state flower, actually the wood violet, prunella, self-heal, both of those are native, plantain, all can take mowing and can reflower at low heights. Clovers, why the ones that we can grow, like Dutch white clover, are not native, they have amazing ecological benefits, especially when we talk about pollinators. And yes, creeping Charlie, which is dreaded by most homeowners in their lawn. I've never met one homeowner that's successfully gotten rid of creeping Charlie, so why not live with it? And what we found at the Arboretum is that, especially with climate change, we're seeing a lot of our native pollinators coming out of dormancy earlier in the year, but we're not seeing our native plants responding the same way. So when they come out, they need something to eat. And creeping Charlie, we find, is one of the earliest flowering species. So we tend to leave it in beds in the early part of the season, and then we'll weed it out later there. Fruit, having an extended fruit production through the growing season and into the winter. So I'll show you a few species that have persistent fruit, which becomes quite important, especially for birds that do not migrate.
What's that one in the middle, the purple one?
This one here?
Yeah.
This is prunella or heel-all. So heel-all is a common name. I think I mentioned my wife is an herbalist. She makes a salve with that. So it was used by indigenous cultures to help various skin ailments, whether they be cuts, bruises, etc. But that is prunella, and it'll come in on its own in your lawn. The other thing a lot of people forget about is incorporating an evergreen. If you've ever wondered where birds go in a snowstorm, this is what they're looking for shelter during inclement weather in particularly. And then incorporating decaying material. You know, I'm just like most people, I like to pick up dead wood, other things, but leaving it is quite important, especially for birds, because that's where a variety of bugs and other critters that they want to eat can be found. So it gives shelter to things like that. Water source year-round, that's great if you have the ability, but that can be tough. I know we're not able to do it where I live. A pollinator habitat, we want to look at not only feeding, but also nesting. So again, if we look at the natural landscape, we want to have a variety of different things there. And one thing we forget about is having access to soil services for nesting. At the Arboretum, we make our own wood chips from downed and removed trees, and they can easily get through that. So it doesn't have to be completely bare ground, which becomes usually a nightmare for weeds. I think everybody knows pesticides we want to try to avoid whenever possible. The native flowering forbs, shrubs, etc., blooming through the season, we'll be talking about that. The nest block comes up in both of these pictures that I picked up from the USDA and CIRSIS here, or CIRSIS. We do not recommend that. So what we found at the Arboretum is it tends to spread disease. Unless you have the ability to clean those out, and some of them can be quite intricate. They look super cool, that's for sure. But we find they're more detrimental than positive. And I'll talk about at least one shrub which gives a similar, actually what these boxes are trying to mimic. So it may be better just to put into your landscape a plant that the bees evolved with. And this is another great chart, which I think a lot of us don't think about, but we can actually draw in a variety of pollinators, and yes, indeed, bats can be one. I don't know, we don't necessarily need to draw wind in, but beetles, bees, etc. And we can do that by planting things with certain colors, nectar guides, odors, pollen, and the actual shape of the flower. So I think this is pretty neat to think about. So I think a lot of people think about how to bring in something like a hummingbird. We know the tubular shape, etc. But we can do the same for a variety of other pollinators. And believe it or not, beetles are the oldest pollinator in existence. So they were the pollinator of the very first angiosperms or flowering plants. It's pretty fascinating. I'm very into magnolias, not native here, but that is the evolutionary pollinator of magnolias worldwide. So insects are incredibly important. I know a lot of us don't necessarily want those in our yard, but if without them, we can't have something like a bird. So we can see from this Audubon magazine, the take-home from this is 96% of all terrestrial North American birds raise their young on insects. And caterpillars are the #1 food which they do feed them because of the fat and protein. So I'll focus on caterpillar species that are found on all these native plants, specifically for breeding birds. I'll show you the two main sources that I've used, so you can go online. If I don't cover a plant that you would like to know more about, I'll only go through a few highlights just because of time. But if we go into the National Wildlife Federation Native Plant Finder, we can plug in our zip code, and it'll generate a list of all the native plants in your area. You then have the ability to pick flowers and grasses or trees and shrubs. Obviously, we're doing trees and shrubs here. And it'll give the species of butterflies and moths that use it. Are folks familiar with Doug Talame out of Delaware? He's really been beating the drum for the band of planting just natives. And this is what he really focuses on. He's an entomologist, and he and grad students were paid by this group to focus on and count the number of different species of butterflies and moths that use these different plants as hosts. Not for their beauty, but for their edibility for birds in particular. So you can see here I plugged in a buttonbush. I don't know if folks are familiar with that. You will be by the end of this talk tonight. I think an underused but a really dynamic native shrub. So I brought that up. We can see 17 species. The other one I use, which if you're not familiar with, I hate to recommend something from Illinois over Wisconsin, but this is just a fantastic resource. I believe it is nonprofit. It's primarily volunteers doing this, but boy, is it great. At the end of this, I'll also give you all my references, and this will be up there. So for the most part, for southern Wisconsin at least, we have pretty good overlay of what is native to northern Illinois and what's native here. So we bring this up. We have the ability again to go into the trees, shrubs, and vines, plug in buttonbush, and it gives me quite a bit of information here on it. But what I'm interested in here is the faunal association. So we can see this, the pointer doesn't like to work on the screen here, but we can bring up a bird list of what uses that. And they do give their references here. So they're, you know, I think it's something that is pretty definitive here. So these are the ones I'm using for the most part. I do use a few other things, which I'll show you at the end, to come up with the various species. One thing though, I'll tell you up front, no matter how many of these buttonbush you plant in your yard, on your property, the likelihood of getting the greater prairie chicken into your yard is probably zero. So just if there are species that are pretty rare, sometimes we'll see passenger pigeon listed in some of these historic lists. I do not count that as one, unfortunately. Everybody knows where the last passenger pigeon was killed? Yep, right here in Wisconsin. It was said, you know, when Europeans first arrived, when they migrated through, it would blacken the sun. There were so many of them, yep. Millions, if not billions, but we were able to kill them all. So I've got a list. These are my favorite. This isn't every native shrub, but these are mine. I've got most of these in my yard at home. And I've got bolded just the ones that I'll focus on tonight. Same thing for trees. So a lot of different tree species. These are ones that I would recommend. And again, we'll just be looking tonight at the ones that are bolded. So we can jump into this here. Amelanchier comes by a lot of different names: serviceberry, Saskatoonberry, shadblow, Juneberry. We have 8 native species here in Wisconsin, including a naturally occurring hybrid. The ones we'll most readily find at a nursery are going to be Arborea canadensis, laevis, and grandiflora. So the X in front of that means it's a hybrid. They can range anywhere from small suckering shrubs to fairly tall, kind of between a shrub and a tree, to about 20 feet. And that's going to be more laevis and grandiflora. Spread can be variable.
Does the Wisconsin Arboretum maintain all these varieties?
We have many more than these. So these would be species, but we have any species that can grow here, not just native to Wisconsin.
Nursery where you sell those?
We don't sell any of them through the Arboretum. We're pretty bare bones staff, and we don't have propagation, etc. So we just had our native plant sale last weekend, and they do sometimes bring in a few woodies to that as well. But I think you can go to a lot of just local decent nurseries. I don't know what's out here in particular, but I'd be surprised if you can't find some of these. Full sun, part shade. You no doubt have driven by them out here. They've just finished blooming. We see them as an edge species. They're blooming about the same time as wild plum, but you can tell them because they bloom with some of the foliage out. So they are non-precocious in the world of woody plants, blooming after the leaves are there. In the world of horticulture, of course, we're looking at seasons of interest, and we don't want just spring. Something like forsythia looks great for a couple of weeks if we're lucky, and not so much the rest of the year. With Amelanchier, we get 4 true seasons of interest. So spring, we're going to get those flowers. Summer, we're going to get edible blue fruit. So Juneberry is the common name because they're going to be ripe in June. Very similar to blueberries. Just fantastic fruit there. Fall color, extremely showy. And I think the bark, especially if it's up close to a house, like I've got one right next to the house, is quite interesting, especially with a little snow on it.
So we can eat serviceberry?
Oh, you bet you can. But what you're going to find, I'll tell you here in a sec, it's hard to beat the birds to them. Yes, if you've never had a serviceberry pie, you should change that this year. So flowers, early April, perfect, is going to tell us both male and female parts in the same flower. Pollinator benefits, again, very early nectar and pollen source. So we see a whole variety of bees, as well as wasps. Wasps are a super important pollinator that we think of as more of a nuisance. Again, the fruit is blueberry-like. Late May here, early June, incredibly attractive to birds. So that's going to be the biggest issue is getting those, because as soon as they ripen, here's some eating them, a cedar waxwing and a robin before they're even ripe. So they will turn blue. I've had one before we had to redo our house right outside the back door. And I wish I had taken a picture or a little video a few years back. There were 5 species of birds in my little Amelanchier fighting over the fruit between each other. Birds, because really of that fruit, up to 30 species are known to eat it. Host plant, 105 different species of butterflies and moths. Betula nigra, the river birch. This one I don't think gets used nearly as much as it should in landscaping. Everybody wants paper birch. Paper birch has a lot of issues. Number one issue, as soon as it gets stressed, usually by drought, we have a native borer, the bronze birch borer, which does the same thing to birch that emerald ash borer is doing to ash. So girdles it by eating the cambial tissue under the bark. So river birch, even though its name would lead us to believe we can only grow it in wet areas, indeed we can grow it in drier areas as well. So you can kind of read that as well. When you go to the nursery, they're going to give you usually options of buying it as a clump, any birch, or you can get it as a single stem. And that's up to you or your application of it. Full sun, partial shade. I usually go for a little bit of shade, just a little less stress on birches, which are not the longest lived in the world. So native to stream banks and floodplains, very tolerant of wet soils, but can take quite a bit of dry areas. So one of the most disease-free and heat tolerant. Heat tolerant doesn't necessarily mean drought tolerant. So if we do get another severe drought, and that seems to be getting the 100-year drought every 5 years or so these days, the important thing would be to put some mulch underneath. And again, we just use not bark mulch, but just chipped wood. So if you have a forest company coming through, maybe clearing lines, they're always looking for a place to dump that. And that's a great source as opposed to buying bark mulch that's usually coming up from down south, usually from loblolly pine, and oftentimes is going to have a colorant in it as well. Or, you can also water it. I've not had to do that at the Arboretum. We've got some great old specimens there, but something to think about. Excellent fall color, and the bark, I think, is absolutely awe-inspiring, especially during the winter. Flowers, May, but in this case they're monoecious, so separate male and female. They are wind pollinated. So if we see catkins, and again this isn't working up here, but that usually tells us this will be the male flower that the pollen is coming from, that it's wind pollinated. However, we know that quite a few species, in this case 18, will go to that pollen. Even though they're not pollinating, they'll go and use that as a food source. The seed is a small winged nut that ripens in June. We know at least 32 bird species eat this. I have seen it used in the winter as well. So some of these will be retained on the tree, and it's a great winter food source for non-migrating birds. They can also use it because of that bark for nesting in other habitat as they get under that habitat or cover. In this case, a whopping 358 species of butterflies and moths are using this. That's getting kind of scary sounding, however. If you have this many on this tree every year, how does it grow, right? How does it have any foliage? So something to realize is that the more species we have, the greater chance of having one every year. It doesn't mean all of them are on these trees and shrubs every year. And I like to use this example. I think I mentioned before we started, I've lived up in the Baraboo Bluffs for 33 years, and for only 2 of those years, we had this insane elm spanworm outbreak. At that point, I was working very closely with the DNR's forest health folks, and they didn't know what the heck was going on. They'd never seen it before either. But this would have been one of the species listed for a lot of these things. My wife and I were out in the woods about this time of year, right at sundown, super quiet, and you could actually hear them eating the foliage. Come back a few weeks later, and they would come down out of the canopy on these silk ropes, and they'd just be dangling there. It was kind of creepy. But I'm just trying to use this as an example. This is 2 years out of how many? 50, 60, you might see an outbreak like this. So don't be overly concerned that all these species are going to be on any given plant at every season. Yes?
For the river birch, does that, one of the problems that I know people have said with the paper birch is that it drops branches and stuff all the time. It's kind of a dirty tree. Does the river birch have a similar MO?
I would hate to call it a dirty tree. But yes, birch tend to be a bit weaker wooded and a little shorter. They're not going to be an oak. But yeah, they will shed some branches, not like a willow or something, but that can occur. But I don't really find that to be a horrible issue.
It's a very niche product, but there's some folks that tap river birch trees for syrup.
You can tap birch if you're very patient and you don't want to eat much syrup that year. You can do it. Celtis occidentalis, hackberry. This was kind of the forgotten native tree species, and I think partially because the name is not too catchy here. So the name is actually a mispronunciation of the Scottish word for cherry, hagberry. I've got down here. The southern species gets the much sexier name of sugarberry here. So hackberry is really found its niche right now as a street tree replacing ash. We're seeing in a lot of urban environments. So about the same size as ash, 40 to 60. Can have, I think, a nice form to it. Pyramidal in youth, becoming upright and arching. Full sun, partial shade. I think of it much more of a full sun plant. The fruit is actually date flavored. So if you were to eat this little fruit, again, my pointer is not working up here, you would find that it is very sweet. And you'd also find that 3/4 of it is the seed, and you're going to chip a tooth if you're not careful on that. So sugarberry down south, again, Scottish. Hackberry is actually cherry. It is an incredibly tough tree, so tolerates windy sites, drought, clay, wet, air pollution, is somewhat salt sensitive, so the literature says, but it's being used extensively. I know in Madison and elsewhere as a street tree. Okay, fall color, again, ash, alternative, and if I haven't gotten you going, usually if I have younger kids, and I'm touring them and they're starting to get bored, I tell them how they can get an illegal plant in the front yard. So this was in the elm family for most of my life. I'm 61. And elm, if we ever look at the leaves, we see that the base of the leaf has this uneven base to it. And that's very indicative of elm. And I think maybe you'll agree that looks very much like an elm, yes? So it was in the Ulmaceae family until about 12 years ago. Somebody got the great idea to do a DNA analysis, 23andMe, on Celtis, and they discovered it is not related to elm whatsoever. They now put it into a family that before that only had 2 genuses and 3 recognized species. Anybody? At least one of you has a beverage with one of the family members in it, Humulus lupulus, hop. You also in this region, I think, have Humulus japonica, which is starting to become an invasive. But where the family gets its name is from cannabis. So let me introduce you to the latest family member of the Cannabaceae. I still cannot wrap my head around it. Hops, it looks a little bit similar, but certainly not hackberry. Forward we go. Flowers early to mid April. Polygamomonaceous, so a new one for you. So this can produce either male or female and or perfect flowers when needed. Yes, nature has no issue with sexuality being very fluid here. That said, it's wind pollinated, but it also means it's going to have fruit every year. Fruit again is a small pea-sized drupe. Anybody ever eaten a drupe before? I bet you have. Anybody had a peach, right? So one large seed in the middle. Seed ripens later September, October. I think I got to change my ripening of fruit a little bit earlier there. Birds, at least 24 species used, and something that some people kind of wig out about, but to me it's almost an identification with it, is this nipple gall. We see it in the southern species, we see it in this species. And it's actually a psyllid that lays eggs in there. And critters will eat it. I've watched with quite a lot of enjoyment, squirrels will come up and eat these psyllids out of these there. It doesn't hurt the plant, and I think it gives it kind of a unique look to it. Hosts for butterflies, 38, and yes, the much coveted hackberry emperor moth will only be found on this. I gave this talk a number of years ago. A guy came up to me and said, David, I planted a hackberry 35 years ago, and I've yet to see an emperor moth. But he's a patient man, so not that common. And here is Cephalanthus occidentalis, the previous mentioned button bush. It can really range, so anywhere from 5 diminutive to easily 12 and even taller feet, spread 4 to 8. So quite variable. So it can be hard sometimes to know what you're going to get once they fully mature. Open rounded habit, we can see that in the picture there. Full sun, part shade. I like full sun, you're usually going to get a better flower production. The flowers are absolutely outstanding and long lasted. So here we've got June to August with the flowers. The flowers we've got here, quite unique looking, maybe a little too COVID looking right now, but they will then produce the fruit. Doesn't really ever change from that round form to it. The nutlet fruits will persist into the winter. The leaves can be quite attractive, so glossy and green, coming out late. So sometimes people think their button bush is dead. It's just starting to leaf out now. So looks a little barren there. And then they can get quite nice yellow to red fall color in the fall. Native to wet areas. So we often see this being used in rain gardens. But it can also be used in dry areas. So when we look at its natural habitats, yes, wet is very common, but we also can find it on rocky outcroppings. And I've got some planted in the open at the Arboretum doing great. I've also got one planted on the south side of my house, which doesn't mind that at all. I've got it right next to the rain spout off the roof, so it can go from dry to wet. So pretty versatile in what it can take. I'll just mention nativars. Got a bad name, partially due to the aforementioned Doug Talame. But realize that almost all nativars, so it's a native plant that has a cultivar. Cultivar only exists in cultivation, but almost all of these cultivars were plucked out of nature. They weren't genetically modified, they weren't hybridized, etc. But what the nativar, when we worry about it, is when we have a different flower form, right? The flower becomes different. I don't know if you're familiar with all these crazy echinaceas that people have hybridized. That's when we get into trouble with pollinator benefits. We get into these big, weird flowers, and we can take away things like nectar, pollen, etc. Or if there's a change to the foliage, so say it's a yellow or whitish foliage to it, then you can lose some of the benefits from that. But in this case, I'm listing 3 things here. These give you the knowledge right up front of what size they're going to be. So at the Arboretum, I have one that's probably as big as this table back here. I've really got to take a picture of myself in front of the 2 sugar sacks, my favorite, and you'll see you probably don't want to find out years down the road you've got one that's like 16 feet tall and quite rangy. But again, these were all just taken out of nature. They're going to have all the same ecosystem services as whatever you're going to call the wild type there. So just a little bit about that. Flowers, again, June to August, perfect, so male and female parts in it. Pollinator benefits are just through the roof. So nectar and pollen source for all sorts of different pollinators, and indeed including this lovely fellow right here. So we can bring hummingbirds into it as well. And that really kind of goes against what we think of flower forms for hummingbirds. We usually think tubular, but there it is using that. The fruit is a small, here's a new one for you too, schizocarp. So another small winged nut. So here's the wing, here's the actual seed itself. At least 13 species of birds eat it, and including the ruby-throated hummingbird. 17 species of butterflies and moths, so not too bad there. Talked at the beginning about incorporating a conifer. That can be pretty tough in smaller landscapes. But eastern red cedar, there is such a variety of forms. The species is incredibly diverse. So I think everybody can find room for an eastern red cedar. Unfortunately, in the prairie world, it's gotten a bad name just because it is one of the first species that will come into bare land there. But easily controlled with fire if needed. So they can be anywhere from 40 to 50 feet tall, 8 to 20 spread. Columnar growth, but they can be, as I said, very, very variable. They are dioecious. So if your plant is dioecious, there are separate male and female plants. If I had my druthers, I would always get a female because we like the fruit, right? Everybody calls this a fruit, but it is truly a cone. And I'll ask you the question I ask everybody when I bring up juniper. What is the difference between gin and vodka? You can make vodka out of potatoes if you're in Russia, perhaps. But most people will classify gin and vodka as a light-colored or clear alcohol. So traditionally in England, the only difference is the use of juniper berries. So that's what gives it its flavor. It's actually coming from another species, Juniperus communis, the common juniper, which is found right here in Wisconsin as a native, as well as over in the UK. Tolerates an amazing variety of soils, so everything from swamps to rocky glades, and it is indeed the most drought-tolerant native conifer in our state. We can use it as a specimen, or we can use it as a screen. I put deer-resistant here because compared to something like arborvitae, which is a deer candy, and we saw it up until not too long ago, that would be the major green screen you'd see people using. Now with the deer populations exploding in the state, if you see arborvitae, usually it's denuded from 6 foot down the browse area for deer. Technically, this is usually on every list of deer resistant, but if the population gets high enough and they're starving, they want something green in the winter. So they will tend to browse a little bit, but not near as bad as arborvitae. Again, tremendous genetic variability size. Yes, some turn brown in the winter, others stay green, form, etc. And if you've ever had a cedar chest, it's almost always going to be this wood. So it's kind of an odd name, eastern red cedar. True cedar doesn't grow in Wisconsin. It's actually a juniper. Flowers are pretty early, so February to March, usually dioecious, occasionally monoecious, so they can shift around as well, and it's going to be wind pollinated. Fruit again, only on females, that berry-like cone, At least 25 species of birds eat it. Exfoliating bark is actually used by some birds. They'll strip it and use it as nesting material, and is an incredibly high quality bird shelter for nesting and roosting. I have a good friend who's lucky enough to have a very small house on Lake Monona in Madison, and he's got a little scraggly eastern red cedar in his yard underneath a 300-year-old bur oak that comes over from the neighbor's yard. In the early spring, oh boy, probably 15 or so years ago, he was looking out the window. It was during the migration. In the spring, we had a weather inversion where it suddenly got cold. All the birds came out of the air to look for shelter. He looked out the window. There wasn't a bird in the bur oak, but he counted over 15 species of birds using his little scraggly eastern red cedar as shelter from that storm during migration. So it's just absolutely amazing, the power of an evergreen in your yard. 26 species of butterflies and moths use it. Okay, if I have not sold you on this species yet, how about this? Did you know the oldest tree species in our state is indeed an eastern red cedar, found by a researcher from Canada who discovered that old trees were growing along the Niagara escarpment. So it's an old rock form that goes from up in Canada through Green Bay all the way down to Decorah, Iowa. So he got a grant and he started to go along the Niagara escarpment, and he started to core sample these trees to be able to accurately date them. And he found, and here is an artistic reproduction of that 1,300-year-old red cedar growing out of a rocky crevice there. So pretty amazing. Did quite a bit of stuff. I mean, we can go all the way back to 707 with this tree. Fascinatingly enough, this predated the use of GPS, and he forgot where exactly the tree was, which may be a good thing. People can do weird things to ancient plants for some strange reason, but pretty amazing.
So is it safe to say that the red cedar would be like one of the native contexts in like the prairie, like savanna mosaic, where there was fires that they would persist on crags on goat prairies?
They could, right. I mean, goat prairies without fire, I mean, they'll just take over it.
Because I have a juniper-like low-laying shrub on a crag that I was assuming was eastern red cedar, but
Yep.
it looks like it's been browsed for many years. It's really gnarly looking.
Yep.
And I want to introduce fire, but I'm worried about
Right, you could burn that out. I mean, if it's a little crag, you could just do some prep around it to prevent the fire.
The habitat.
Yeah. I mean, they are naturally occurring bonsai, is what they really you can think of them as.
And that would likely be Virginia.
Virginiana, yes, the common. If it's tree form-like, there's horizontalis, there's communis, but those are more shrub form-like. They can be very variable, but they're not going to be a tree form. And so if you're seeing something with one single stem growing in that fashion, most likely it is going to be this. But I'd have to see a picture of it to tell. Prunus virginiana, choke cherry. This is one of our 3 species. I use this one because this is what the Ho-Chunk use. The Sioux use it as well. So this was really was more important for the indigenous cultures of the Midwest than something like black cherry would be. So in this case, we've got 20 to 30 feet tall. I say 15 to 20 foot spread, but it has a suckering habit. So if you come across it, it usually is a clonal mass to it. So something to know if you're going to put it in your yard. And that's where a lawn and mowing comes in handy. We can easily keep it in check by occasionally mowing around it. Irregular oval rounded form, full sun, part shade. We normally always see it as an edge species, so part shade is where it's going to be. Extremely adaptable to soil and pHs, which can be important, especially in urban areas where we have mixed soil and often high pHs. Very drought tolerant, which is becoming more and more important as we feel climate change really taking control of our summers more than I've ever noticed before. Flowers are great, very, very fragrant, April to May. So just ending up, it's flowering now. The fruit is pea-shaped berries. Start purple, they're going to start red, purple, and then they'll become almost black. Here, extremely attractive to wildlife. A fruit can be harvested, processed into jams, jellies, and pies. So when you talk to the ho-chunk, there is, just like the hackberry, a large seed in the middle. So there's a whole process of getting the pulp off of it and then processing it. And it was used quite a bit to make fruit leathers. If we go further to the west, where the Sioux were using it and still are, mixing it with buffalo, dried buffalo meat as a winter food source. So pretty neat there. Fall colors, pretty good as well. So yellow to orange there. Flowers, again, going to be perfect in these clusters. Pollen and nectar source for quite a variety of pollinators, including flies. Yes, flies are quite important, believe it or not. Oftentimes flies, though, are drawn to malodorous flowers. Anybody here trying to grow pawpaws? So pawpaws are in flower right now. They have a deep red flower mimicking meat, and they also are malodorous, so bad smelling flower, and they are specifically pollinated by flies. We can see beetles and a few other things come in there as well. And flies are not the best pollinators. So that's why you don't get a lot of fruit set on pawpaws, unfortunately. But back to chokecherry. Birds, at least 38 species, eat it. Host to 377 species of butterflies and moths. So you're pretty much assured you're going to have something for the birds to eat if you have this there. Got to put oak in here. There is no other native species that has more ecosystem services in the upper Midwest than an oak. I have swamp white oak. It was kind of the forgotten oak. We're seeing a lot more use of it finally as street trees in particular. And again, the swamp, I think, keeps people away from using it. So a full-size oak, so about 60 foot tall, a nice rounded form, gonna want full sun. And yeah, we're gonna find it natively growing in the bottomlands, along streams, along lakes. Easy to tell it from bur oak. Some people have a hard time, but if we can see the underside of the leaf, that's where the species name bicolor comes from. Very, very noticeably white. And so if it rustles in the wind, you can really notice it and pick it out there. So we're going to see it in these wet areas. Takes poor drainage very well, but it takes drought, heat, and salt extremely well as well. Leaves are dark and shiny again, white underneath. Branches have, especially as they get a little older, this, I think, rather pretty and attractive exfoliating bark to it. And it is one of the most easily transplanted oaks, at least for native to Wisconsin. So oaks, up until not too long ago, were incredibly difficult to transplant. You'd almost never see them sold bare root because they produce tap roots. And so if you were to dig it up, you oftentimes lost the majority of the root system. With swamp white oak, it does not have a very firmly established taproot, mainly because of where it likes to grow in these wet areas. Taproots don't work too well when you're completely submerged in water. So very easy to transplant. Nursery systems have also figured out how to get more of a fibrous root system on young seedlings. They'll actually go in and undercut them in the field using a big blade behind a tractor, usually done in the fall of the first or second year, and that forces it to produce a fibrous root system. In pot culture, if anybody's ever bought or seen them being grown, they're usually grown in pots with no bottom. So they air prune, the taproot hits the air, self-prunes itself, and then it's forced to create a fibrous root system. But in any case, flowers mid to late spring. Monoecious, so monoecious would be something that you'd have both male and female, but they're separate on these. They're not a perfect flower. Wind pollinated, so we're not going to see a lot of use in pollinators. Fruit, of course, acorns, we all know, incredibly important for all sorts of critters, would have been used certainly by the ho-chunk as well. At least 28 species of birds eat it, and to a lesser extent, they're using it for nesting and cover. But this one wins the lottery with 389 species. When you look at Talamay's research, he has that for all oak, for our region. So it's not as if swamp white is better than burr, is better than white. He gives them all that same rating there. Kind of getting towards the end here, but I like to put this one out. Again, prairie people do not like sumac in general, but that's more the staghorn and smooth. Here's the flame leaf or shining sumac. Much more diminutive. Here is my mentor and the former curator, Ed Haskis. He's about 6'2", so you can see the size of that there. So it gets about 15 tops, but it again suckers, but not as aggressively as we see with the other two native species here. Can form quite a interesting, irregular, and picturesque appearance to that growth over time. Full sun, part shade. Again, a edge species here, extremely drought tolerant. So something I think we need to be thinking about more and more. Is capable of amazingly great fall color. So those two common names, flaming and shining, are both about that fall color. I mean, boy, does it stand out in the landscape in the fall. That said, it's better for more of an informal, naturalized setting here. Fruit, again, like the juniper, only on the female plants and is going to be showy. We also sometimes hear it called the winged sumac, and that's because it has a compound leaf. And with a compound leaf, the center petiole is called a rachis, and in this case you can see that rachis is actually winged. So another easy way to identify it in the field. The other two native upright forms of sumac we have here in the state are not going to have that. Flowers, so male, female, you're going to need both to get the fruit. And again, not super common, so may need to get a few of them on your landscape to get it. Pollinators, we see nectar and pollen for a whole assortment of pollinators, including the wasps and flies. Fruit is very similar to the sumac you're probably all familiar with, those drupes born in clusters, and can persist all the way through the winter. Birds will eat it. It's not top of the list, but it's going to be there when they really need it, when there's really no other food sources. At least 14 bird species are using it, 37 species of butterflies and moths. Kind of end here. Those dang taxonomists keep changing the names of these things. It's now Sambucus nigra subspecies canadensis. It was not just a couple of years ago. But this is common elderberry. So if you don't know it, you should. 5 to 12 feet, kind of a large shrub, if you will. It can spread by rhizome, so expect it to want to branch out some there, or you can keep it in check by mowing around it. Full sun, part shade. Again, full sun's going to give us the best flower and fruit production. Extremely adaptable to a whole variety of soils. Oftentimes we see it in disturbed soils by old buildings. Seems to be very common there. Can even be used in a rain garden, so it can take saturated soils. Incredibly outstanding, showy, fragrant white flowers. July followed by the dark edible fruit. And indeed, it makes excellent jellies and pies. Yes.
Is this one of those plants where if you cut it after it produces the flowers or the berries, that it will help to stimulate further growth of other plants with it?
It will indeed. So we can regenerate it by cutting it back. There. So it also has hollow stems that have been used for everything from maple taps to pipe stems, and we'll see also used by pollinators. But if you've never had a elderberry pie, this summer is the time to do it. Unlike the amelanchers, there's so many fruit here the birds can't get them all. So what we do, I say we, really my wife does, she'll harvest the fruit during the season and then just freeze it. And then we make a pie. We learned from our neighbor who just passed away last month, a month shy of 105. She was born and raised right on the road we live on, how to make an elderberry pie. She used Jell-O, we used tapioca. But just a fabulous pie to have in the middle of winter there. You can also juice it. Used a lot in smoothies. You can freeze it and whatnot. It's kind of taking off as a new fruit there. We've got, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 that we planted out to use. Flowers late June, July, so still further out there. Really interesting consistency to it, great in a bath. Floating around will give an interesting aroma and just consistency to that, and it feels nice on the skin. So perfect, but it has no nectary. So it's going to produce just pollen. Pollinator benefits, all sorts of bees, flies, butterflies. But where it also really comes into, when I talked about the nesting boxes really not being recommended, this is the nature's form of a nesting box. And this is what these mason bees, in particular carpenter bees, evolved using. So again, hollow stem, and humans, we just like to clean things up, but these will, kind of age out, break off, and you're drawn to wanting to clean that up. Well, it's best to actually leave it. At least leave it until later spring when these can hatch out if some of them do overwinter in there. But here's a great way to bring in nature's pollinator box there as well. So birds, at least 38 species, eat the fruit, and about 37 species of butterflies and moths. All right, and with that, thank you for hanging around with me. Here are the main references I used. Again, the National Wildlife Federation wouldn't necessarily be where I would think to look for the moths and butterfly caterpillars, but that is a great resource for that. And again, Illinois Wild Flowers is absolutely spectacular. And there's a variety of other ones as well, but these were the ones that I mainly used to come up with the species list. Well, thank you.